welcome to the program that I hope you do enjoy. I enjoy it because I love doing it. I love talking with the people that come our way. And a gentleman that has come our way through a wonderfully circuitous route. I hope I've pronounced that right. Circular drive, so to speak. Thomas Elsner, JDMA. He's a Jungian analyst. He's a psychologist, and he's actually right here in Santa Barbara, California. And we are going to have a very interesting conversation today with him about psychology. What's Jungian psychology? What sets that apart from, where is it on, let's say, the scale of all of the different, well, I guess we'll call them psychological schools of thought, maybe. Maybe that's one way to put it, as well as other things as well. And I want to thank you so much, Doctor. Good to have you on the program.
Great, Richard. It's great to be here. I'm really looking forward to it. You're such an eloquent and great interviewer, so it's a pleasure for me. Great to be talking with you.
Well, thank you very much for the compliment, and I will leave it at that. It used to be years ago, Tom, that I would get a compliment, and I would go into explanation as to why I was the way you said I was. And then I started hearing myself going, you just need to shut up.
just take the compliment.
Just take it, will you, please? They're giving you a $500 check. Why do you need to explain what you're going to do with it? Just move on. I took psychology in college, and we learned a lot. I didn't do well in the course. I think a C or a D maybe, but it was fascinating to me. Now it's a whole different area than psychiatry. Because I think psychology, you're talking about Freud, you're talking about, in your case, Carl Jung, and there are so many other schools of thought, if that's the right word to use when it comes to psychology. First of all, I guess we will start where I like to start in these programs, defining terms. And what is, in a definition, if you will, what is Jungian psychology?
Well, yeah, great place to start. Jungian psychology, as you mentioned, came out of Freudian psychology. Jung was one of Freud's, well, maybe his chief disciple, the crown prince to the Freudian psychoanalytic tradition, as he's once called. And Jung was a young man, and Freud was a father figure to him, but they had a close relationship. So, Jungian psychology is a subset of what's been more generally called depth psychology, or the psychology of the unconscious mind.
Okay.
So Freud's analogy, right, was that the conscious mind is the tip of the iceberg, and little piece of the iceberg pops up above the water, but the vast majority of the iceberg is down below, under the water, that you can't see. So Jungian psychology is a psychology of the unconscious, and it focuses on the root causes of what's, manifesting in our conscious life that we don't know, that are truly unconscious. Some of your listeners might be familiar with Jungian psychology through some of the phrases that he invented: introversion, extroversion, synchronicity. Jungian psychoanalysts work a lot with dreams. Jung invented the term complex. Maybe you've heard of the father complex or inferiority complex. He was the inventor of that too. So, that's a little bit of a background into what we're talking about when we're talking about Jung.
It also goes to show that nothing comes out of a vacuum. As you said, Jung was actually one of Freud's, shall we say, proteges.
Yes.
And I'm sure Freud, although I guess they do use the term father of psychology, I'm not sure if he is actually the father of psychology in that regard, but he obviously had to have studied someone else who came along before him, and so on and so forth, right? So,
absolutely. Yeah.
It's a path.
There's a path, definitely. And you can trace that path back indefinitely. Back thousands of years to the proto-psychologists that Jung was interested in, for instance, the alchemists. But the more recent, past foundations of Freudian Jungian psychology can be found in the 19th century, specifically in the phenomenon of Romanticism, German and English Romanticism, You might have heard of the romantic poets like Coleridge and Wordsworth and Keats, and people like this in Germany and England in the 19th century who were interested in the primacy of the unconscious mind and were fascinated with all that the Enlightenment had left out of its purview. You know, madness, deep emotional states, imagination, fantasy, the Gothic horror, the supernatural. The Romantic poets were interested psychologically in these phenomena that, you know, the more rational, scientific dimensions of that era had just dismissed as delusion only, or only psychosis. And these Romantic poets were interested in the metaphors that would be true within what looked like delusional states. That's the immediate foundation of Freud and Jung. Freud, for instance, won the Goethe Prize for Literature, believe it or not. And he was a brilliant writer, you know, and he said it wasn't me that discovered the unconscious, but the poets that came before me discovered the unconscious. And I was the one who invented the scientific means of studying the unconscious. So, yeah, so it's a Freudian and Jungian psychology has a rich tradition going back into poetry, philosophy, religion, obviously mythology, alchemy, all of this sort of stuff that the Enlightenment just wrote off as worthless delusion.
Well, tell me about your mother. How do you feel about your mother? You know, it's interesting. That's usually what most people think about when they think about psychology. And I have to say that in my early days as a young man and even as a boy, one of my favorite television programs, and I think maybe this is one of the reasons why I kind of was curious about psychology. My favorite television program was Bob Newhart, and he was a psychologist. And they would have snippets every so often of a little therapy going on. And I'd like to think that it was scripted in at least a fairly honest way, with the characters responding in the way those characters would, like Carlin. Mr. Carlin would, because he was always the cynic. He was just he wasn't an old man, but he was already grumpy, so he was all set for his old age. And it was just very fascinating to watch the dynamics that unfolded. I've been through therapy with a psychologist before. I'm curious, and I want to put this out there to you and see what you think. I had a therapist I was asked to go see. I acquiesced because I thought, you know, for the peace of the household, I'll do this. Who said to me that I had, and this was her word, these were her words, not mine, that I had character flaws. Would you ever tell a patient that they had character flaws, and using those words?
No.
Yeah.
Wouldn't.
Yeah, and then when I asked, list for me all of the names or the names of as many of your friends as you can. 99% of them were female. And she just immediately thought that I had problems. Well, I was a young man in my late 20s or early 30s. Why would I not have a lot of good friends that were female? I mean, I'm a young man that likes females. Where's the problem? But apparently she thought there was a problem. So I have a feeling she went in with preconceived notions. How do you prevent yourself from going into a session or taking on a client and preventing all of that? Because you've seen other patients, you're living your life, you're experiencing, you're growing, you're expanding and so forth. How do you stay, shall we say, in your lane when you're dealing with somebody new?
So, Richard, thank you. That's a wonderful question. Really, really great question. You know, I have to say, just on a personal level as well as a professional level, I have an antagonistic attitude to people that have an overly rigid sense of certainty. And when I work with somebody, I try as much as possible to just put aside whatever preconceptions I have and say, okay, I have no idea why you're here. I have no idea who you are or what the self wants for you, so to speak, or what your destiny in life is. And I try to be as curious as possible, ask as many questions as possible, you know, which makes the whole process interesting rather than coming in with a dogmatic attitude from the start. and judging people. So, I mean, I understand the turnoff of that, starting with you have character flaws, and here's something about your life that you have no problem with at all. It's a positive dimension of your life, and now it's being judged negatively. Like we've got this critical eye. We're going to find what's wrong with you, Richard, and I know in advance what that is. I think that's horrible, and you see it a lot in psychology, sadly, in various ways.
You know, you bring it up an interesting point, because it's almost the same as taking your car to a mechanic and you tell them about a small little problem, front end or something, a little sound that you want to check out. Maybe somebody left a tool up there, and every time you hit a bump it rattles, but you don't know what it is. And when you come back, they've diagnosed 3 other things, and it's like, but that's not what I came here for.
Yeah, right.
And it seems as though some people go into these fields not necessarily to help people, but to help themselves. So they get into these high-paying, what could be fairly profitable areas, and all they're trying to do is pad the bill. You know, have some billable hours, as attorneys say. And that's really unfortunate. And we don't do that here on Tell Me Your Story. What we do is we try to give you information, giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. I'm talking with Dr. Thomas Elsner. He is a Jungian psychologist or analyst. Now, what's the difference? Is it the same thing, just a different name, psychologist versus analyst?
In some ways, it's the same thing with a different name. In some ways, it's different. I'm licensed as a psychoanalyst with the California Medical Board. So clinical psychologists do a lot more testing. They're trained in doing standardized testing and exams and things like that the psychoanalysts aren't trained in. So there's some differences, but you know, mostly it's for most people, it would be a difference in name.
Okay. Well, stay with us, folks. We're going to continue our conversation with the doctor. The good doctor's here. He's in the house, and we are so grateful that he's here joining us here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and I thank you so much for staying with us on Tell Me Your Story as we give you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. It's new paradigms for a new world. And as we like to say, Dr. Thomas Elsner, we're looking for those new ways of living because, quite honestly, all you have to do is look around you. The old ways, they just aren't working anymore for whatever reason. I'm not even going to try to figure out why they're not working. I don't care. They aren't working. It's time to look for those new ways. I don't know if it's going to be found necessarily through psychology. I don't know what the next step. I'm curious from your perspective, obviously with Freud and Jung and some of the others in the 19th into the 20th centuries. You know, is there anything new that we can turn to, or are we right now sort of subject to the old ways of, if I'm using the right term here, psychoanalysis, or facilitating an individual's, shall we call it, internal psychological growth to, I like to say, a higher consciousness? Because if we can get through a lot of the garbage that we've gathered up over the years of our lives, maybe we can get to our life's purpose. And as we kind of jokingly talked about at the beginning of the program, or before we started, about being of service, someone would ask me that question about purpose. I say, well, my purpose is to be of service if I can, and at the same time, being of service without losing myself.
So yes, I think, you know, the intersection between our personal lives, Richard, you know, and what's happening generally in the culture is really interesting to me. So we know, as you're saying, if we talk about cultural issues, that the world is changing so much. We all feel that in so many different ways. The theme of transformation that you can find archetypally all across time and all across the world is die and be reborn. This is the way things change, the way transformation happens. Old ways die, and hopefully new ways come out of that. So, you know, this intersection between where are we in our individual lives living through our own little deaths and rebirths, you know, where our old values crumble, our old sense of meaning doesn't hold water anymore, old marriages that used to be alive are dead, old vocations, you know, we're looking for something new. People that come to me that are living through these types of crises often feel like they are dying sometimes, or they can feel depressed, or, you know, as in a midlife crisis, when the juice of life leaves, the values die. Where are the new values going to be coming from? Where's the new life going to come from? This is the major theme to just start with: die and be reborn. I remember one of my patients who was going through a very dark time, a very dark depression. A man, he had, you talk about dreams. In Jungian analysis, we very literally look at dreams to see whether there's new sparks of life might be coming, you know. And this man consciously was depressed, very down, dark time in his life. He was having dreams that had symbolism of rebirth in them, new sprouts of life growing from the earth, you know, symbols that would say you're in a process of change. And I told him that. I remember once in a session, I said, your dreams are showing you that you're in a transformation process. And I'll never forget what he did. He just looked down, he had his hands over his head, and he said, doesn't feel like transformation. You know, and I always remembered that because I thought, well, God, I shouldn't have said that. But then later on, I said, well, he must have an idea what transformation feels like. If I say to you, you're being transformed, maybe you think you're glowing with light, or you're getting stronger or more beautiful or richer or better or something. And you very rarely think about the caterpillar crawling in the chrysalis and turning to goo, literally dissolving before it is reborn as a butterfly. And it doesn't know that it's going to be a butterfly. All it knows is it's dissolving. So this is the thing that Jung found to be at the bottom of processes of change: is the destruction of the old is the beginning of the new. And we're going to have to live through some dark times before the new life, if it does come, new values, if they do come, the new church, if it does come, the new, you know, world, if it does come, is going to be out of the ashes of the old. So that's what I can, you know, start with as a foundation for how these processes take place, individually and collectively.
Yeah. And that's one of the things we talk about pretty regularly on this program, is that process of transformation. I myself am looking at the various phases of transformation that I've been through in my life, not only in terms of the chronology. I also remember thinking about the question that I know probably was asked more times than he cared to have answered, Robert Bly, regarding men. You know, well, when does a boy become a man? And is it, you know, when do we come of age? For a Jewish boy going through his bar mitzvah, is it 13? Well, in the West, it's not, because they'll have the bar mitzvah, but they still treat him as a young teen, a preteen, or what have you, an adolescent. Whereas I'm sure in the East, he's a man, and in certain tribes, it's the same kind of thing. What is it? Is it 16 when you get your driving permit? Is it 18 when you come of age to vote? Is it 21 when you can drink? Is it your first sexual experience? Is it this, that, and the other thing? And I remember, and I'll share this with you. I used to ask myself that question in my early 20s and mid 20s and late 20s. You know, I wonder, you know, I don't know that I necessarily feel like a man necessarily. I mean, I'm 20, 25, and they say you're a man because you're of age. That's chronology. But what about up here? What about in here? And I had an experience where I was up in the woods with some friends of mine. And this one, a friend of mine that I had helped work on his boat, refurbish the bottom with fiberglass and so forth. We were up there, and he was going on and on about how I should do this and that and the other thing. And finally, I just got fed up. I grew up in a family of 8, okay? And I was asked to do certain chores, so I knew how to do things. And I just threw the stuff down, and I went up the hill. Mm-hmm. Well, he's a Vietnam vet, and somehow I guess I triggered his PTSD, and he comes rolling up the hill, and he's an elderly gentleman, probably at the time. I was 33 at the time. And he was probably in his 60s. And he says, you triggered my PTSD. I says, I don't care. I says, you're not my father, nor are you my professor. I know how to do stuff. Okay? So you need to back off. And he finally, I think he got the message. He actually left the next morning because he had medical appointments he had to go to at the Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale. And so I was there all alone. No vehicle, mind you. I'm stuck until the next guy comes up that evening. Well, the boat was there. I had food. I had a fireplace. I had the tent. I had water. I had all the things that I needed. So I started my morning getting cleaned up, doing the dishes, organizing the camp. I thought, I'm going to put that darn boat in the water and I'm going to row back. And I did. I rowed back and forth on the lake. Had the greatest time, went back to the campsite. I lit this big fire for one hot dog. One hot dog, but it was great. I enjoyed myself, just relaxed around there. Then our other buddies showed up. It was the three of us, but our other buddies showed up, and I was still by myself. And he had brought with him, of course, some alcohol, some beer and Jack Daniels. He brought some baked beans and a big pot with a boneless ham and a bone-in ham. Stuck those on the fire on the fireplace and simmered those away. And we're sitting there at the picnic table having a beer with, I guess it was a Jack Daniels chaser, which I had never done before. I got to tell you, it made me think of that scene in City Slickers, the first one, where they're riding horses and Mitch says, what was your best day? What was your best day? And they go around, the three of them saying, well, my best day was when so-and-so was born, or my best day was when I got married, or whatever. And as I got to the conclusion of that camping trip, I took a look at that question. And it was that day I just described to you with the ending that I just described to you, which I got to tell you, even though I was not a big straight Jack Daniels drinker, mind you, I was 33. It was Labor Day weekend, by the way. I still remember that. And that was my best day. And for 1 month, every day after that became my best day. Is that something that you try to, I don't know if that's part of the Jungian philosophy or not, of trying to look at, and I don't think that it's in the context of the positives versus the negatives. It's looking at your assets or what you're grateful for, that kind of thing. Again, not knowing the ins and outs of this psychological teaching, if that's part of it or not. Is that something that is that you try to get your patients to look at?
I think that's a great question. The best day. I mean, I would want to know more. What made that the best day for you? Was it, I mean, something happened there that gave you a sense of this is.
Oh, it's very simple. Very simple. I stood up for myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. I stood up for myself to the professor.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're standing up to that guy, the Vietnam vet, but you're, like you just said, you're also standing up to, quote, the professor or the father. So you're working through something there with him. At the same time, it's him. You're working through something that was evidently a stuck place for you, or an initiatory event happened, or you broke through into a sense of, this is me now. I'm free from some shackle. You know, that's what Jung called the father complex, you know, that can keep you down or keep you feeling like an adolescent or castrate you or give you less of a sense of authority or power about yourself. So the best day is the day you felt most yourself. I mean, that's the best day for you. And that's the form it takes for you. Beautiful. I mean, says a lot about you. It says a lot about, you know, it tells me a lot about your past and what you were working through. And for you, that's the best day. For another person, their best day would be something completely different. Oh, and that's what we're interested in Jungian psychology is, who are you? You know, what is that for you? What's your best day? What are your issues that you're working through? What's the solution coming from within in your own resources that's going to help you? And the Jungian psychoanalyst is a person who accompanies you, you know, on that journey, including a journey with your dreams, the journey that expresses itself in your unconscious, as well as your, you know, growing up years, your relationship with your father, relationships with authority figures, all of that stuff. So I love that. The best day. That's a great way to put it. Something happened there that was meaningful and that gave you a sense of self.
And it was exciting. And the thing I can remember now, I don't see myself as being angry. Okay. I saw myself as sort of taking back my power, saying, stop. And I've actually done that with a few other people over the years since then, where they start saying something about me. Sometimes it is even derogatory. I had a gentleman once say to me, blah, 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 you idiot. And I said, stop right there, you mother. And I stopped myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great.
And I was looking him square in the face, basically saying, look, we can talk about what you're upset about, but don't you attack me. Don't you start name calling me. I had enough of that in school, being bullied. We're not going there. I'm not playing that game. And I think that finding one's voice is very important. Let's talk about that in terms of finding one's voice. As we continue talking with Thomas Elsner, he is a Jungian analyst. I keep wanting to say analyst. New word. And we're going to continue doing that here on Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we're here Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., and Wednesdays for our special edition of Tell Me Your Story, 9 a.m. on Wednesdays. I hope you listen to them all. They're streaming live at richarddugan.com. And we're also on podcasts on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, and many other locations too numerous to mention. I do have to say that because you folks are reposting our interviews. But we are also on YouTube. Oh, man, I love it. I absolutely love producing those videos and posting them up there. And if you'd like to, why don't you subscribe? I've got 31 subscribers thus far. And I don't care how many I have. I'm just glad you folks are watching the videos or listening to the podcasts. We're almost to 42,000 listens in 3.5 years, folks. Can't thank you enough. Those are the podcasts. So keep doing that. And we'll continue here on Tell Me Your Story as we talk with our very special guest. And we're talking with our very special guest here on Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, Dr. Thomas Elsner, and he is a Jungian analyst, and we are talking about your voice. The program here is, of course, Tell Me Your Story. Well, in order to do that, you have to have a voice. You have to find your voice in order to find your story. Do you find that many of your clients just don't have, or they haven't found their voice where they can speak their truth and start telling you who they really are?
For some people, that's a huge issue. It is the issue in analysis. And some people feel, of course, through trauma growing up or bad family situations, or like you mentioned earlier, being bullied or whatever it might be, they've learned, not a good idea to have my voice. That's not going to go well. If I speak up, I get hit. If I have a different opinion than my family, I get criticized. Think about a kid comes home from school. He's maybe drawn a drawing. He brings it back to his mom. Look, Mom, I drew this drawing. And what if she says, oh, what the hell? Trees aren't red. You colored out of the lines. Crumples it up, throws it in the trash. That's a kid who's just learned a lesson. Not a good idea to have my voice, so to speak. So we develop, because of that, defense systems that protect us from getting hurt. So for some people, this is how that stuff manifests in terms of, what do you feel? What do you really think? Here we are, me and you. It's confidential. No judgments. I want to know, what does that really feel like to you that you just lived through? What do you really want to tell your spouse? What do you want to tell your boss? What do you want for your life? It can be very helpful to have someone with you who's maybe for the first time even caring about asking those questions and not judging you or criticizing you. So, sometimes we got to work through a lot of what we call defense systems that strangely protect us from getting hurt, but at the same time prevent us from having our voice or being authentic or being real.
And our institutions foster that. They foster us not having our own voice. Our religious institutions tell us what to believe. Our political institutions. I sometimes wonder how many people, regardless of what side of the aisle they choose to belong to, really believe the stuff they are spewing out. The people who chose to ransack the Capitol on January 6th, 2021. I wonder if that was their true self, if they were really expressing their voice, or if they were just regurgitating, and I think that's an appropriate word, messages from on high, and so forth. And our educational institutions, how many people even knew about the great economic boon of the black community in Arkansas that was destroyed over a situation that didn't even happen, and they lost everything? How many people even knew, for example, that certain ethnic groups have had a play in certain parts of our social and economic growth, our space program, different institutions as far as, moving forward, upward and onward and evolving, that we didn't hear about in grade school history class? I don't remember hearing about a lot of this stuff. What I do remember, Tom, is on the quintennial, I think, the 500th anniversary of Christopher Columbus sailing the ocean blue in 1492. I was working for a Christian radio station at the time, and I remember what I learned in school, okay, as well as the cute little poetic quote. But I started hearing 3 different versions of history. He was the devil incarnate. He was an angel sent by God. And then he was just an explorer.
Yeah.
And I'm going, I didn't hear any of this when I was in school. And I know there's probably truth in all 3 of those. It's a conglomeration. And yet we accept what we are being told. And I know that this is a little off the beaten path, because when you talk about someone finding their voice, it isn't about what they know of history or math or science or biology or, by the way, did you become an epidemiologist in March of 2020 when the virus and the pandemic hit? Because it was amazing to me to see how many people in the broadcast industry suddenly became experts in epidemiology. I just thought that was, I guess they got it by osmosis or something. You know?
Yeah.
Because I still say, I don't know. But we buy into so much of this, and it's like, is that really me, or am I being led by the nose ring?
Yeah. Wow. Well, fantastic. There's a lot in what you just said. I mean,
sorry about that.
No, it's great. It's just I'm trying my best to listen, and but just the general thing you're saying is this: in the culture, there's this horrible tendency. I'll just translate into a brief way what you said and how it hits me. To be on the right team, and there's a right team and there's a wrong team, and we are good and we think correctly, and they are bad and they think incorrectly. We are good, they are evil, horrible people. And you see it on the right and you see it on the left. And if you turn on MSNBC, Fox News, whatever, you'll see the same, to me, very boring, stuck story in which it's much easier to project, this is Jungian terms we'll bring into this discussion now, to project our own shadows onto enemies outside and fight them in that way, rather than to integrate our own shadows, deal with the enemy within us. The first is much easier than the second. And if you look at, say, political revolutions throughout history, French Revolution, Russian Revolution, the Cuban Revolution, the revolutionaries are always fighting against horrible tyrannical situations that are oppressive. But the revolutions always devolve into violent tyrannies themselves, right? So this problem, I wish it was like the witch hunts. Wouldn't it be great if there was this group of witches and you could identify them, and they were the causes of all the evils in the village? They were turning people's crops dead. They were bewitching people. And then you could just round them up eliminate them and everything would be great.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't that be easy? What if the problem lies within every human heart? The problem of good and evil, the problem of power, the problem of tyranny, the problem of oppression. What if that's true on a deep fundamental level? And until we deal with the deep psychological reality of the shadow sides of ourselves, we're just going to be in a cycle of war forever through projection. So Barbara Hanna, Jungian analyst, invented this term that she called the introversion of war. And this was very important to Jung, the sense of eating our own flesh, drinking our own blood, taking back our own shadows, and dealing with the devil inside of ourselves. And that is different than the typical political solution.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you that I found out another piece of history I didn't know about, but I'm not surprised. What I found out, I wasn't surprised when I read this. And I'm going to accept that it is true just simply because of what we're experiencing now in this particular decade or even past decade. But I certainly probably been going on as long. I read an article where in the second or third century AD, there was a propaganda war between the pro and anti-Catholic forces.
Mm-hmm.
And we already know who won that war.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
But there was a propaganda war back then. Yeah. And it just astounded me, but didn't surprise me. It's like, yeah, that sounds like us.
Definitely.
We haven't learned a damn thing. What we're going to learn from you in just a moment, I'm going to share something with you as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story that I'd love for you to talk about as well, because it dovetails into what we've just been talking about here as we continue New Paradigms for a New World with our special guest, Dr. Thomas Elsner, and he's a Jungian analyst, and we are going to continue here as we talk about these, I think they're fascinating things on this program. Don't you go away. Stay right where you are. We are talking with Dr. Thomas Elsner. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and this is Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I want to read something to you really quickly here. It's fairly short, because this does tend to dovetail into what we've just been talking about.
Great.
I know you're familiar with this, and our listeners probably are too. A young boy and his grandfather are sitting together, wistfully looking up into the distance. The grandfather sighed and said, "I have a fight going on deep inside my chest. It takes place between two wolves. One is a black-hearted, and he is full of self-pity, anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, guilt, resentment, stress, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego." The elder looked at his grandson and went on. The other wolf's heart is full of joy and peace and love and hope, serenity, humanity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, true healing, compassion, and faith. Both wolves are strong and fight to the death. They fight to the death. And let me find where we picked this up here, because somehow I managed to evade the after a long pause. Grandfather says that the fight is going on inside you too, my son, and every other person too. The grandson thought about it for a long while, and then asked, "Which wolf will win, grandfather?" And the grandfather sighs and simply says, "The one you feed." When I was working for the Christian radio station, almost every program constantly was talking about the devil. The devil's here. The devil's there. The devil's everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And someone said to me, outside those confines, in more of the metaphysical realm that I was a part of outside of the station, whatever it is that you're looking for, you will find. Do you find that a lot of people that come to you seeking guidance, seeking help, seeking self-awareness, if you will, or so forth, that's kind of where they're sort of stuck, in that they're feeding, I don't want to say the wrong wolf, because we have a dark and a light side, and that's what makes us who we are. It's which one we choose, as the phrase goes, to feed, that comes out.
Well, so brilliant story. I mean, the reason why we love that story is because it's full of wisdom. So it's a huge step forward in consciousness, that if you can say, there are two wolves in me, and I have a dark side, and I know what it is. And that's not just a theory, like, oh, I know I lie sometimes, or everyone is bad, or everyone has a dark side. I mean, specifically, you know, we know, here's where my power issues are. Here's where I lied the other day. Here's where I, you know, if I look outside at the people that bug me the most, or that I think are the worst people culturally, politically, or personally, and I can recognize that it lives in me. That's a huge step forward in consciousness, right? Yeah. I mean, just that is a big deal, you know? And yeah, and personally in analysis, very often people come in and the problem's all outside. You know, like like I heard this comedian on the radio a few months ago. He said, you guys know what a Freudian slip is? This is the comedian speaking. You know what a Freudian slip is? He goes, I had a Freudian slip the other day. I was at breakfast with my wife and I meant to see past the sugar. And instead I said, you ruined my life, you bleep, 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 you know? So it's like, I know where the problem is. It's outside, it's you. It's my wife, it's my husband, and my boss, it's the Republicans, it's the Democrats, it's the communists, it's the whatever, you know, whatever. So the problem, when we mostly start that way, we project out that dark wolf on the enemies outside of ourselves. It's a horrible problem. So a lot of analysis does start with the beginning of reflection on projections. And it's horrible, horrible hard. It's not easy to you know, a famous Jungian analyst that was one of my mentors, Marion Woodman, she told me of a dream she had once, that the dream said, how does it feel to be the thing you fought against your whole life? How does that feel? I mean, feel like not just an idea, but really. But for me, that's the first step forward in consciousness. So we don't repeat all this stupid, think of racism, wars, homophobia, all of sexism. It's all projections of shadow sides that are unacknowledged, right? So this is the big deal in psychoanalysis. Jung said, we don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That's a type of enlightenment.
Yeah.
So,
you know, I use this analogy when it comes to these situations where, as you aptly put, I've used the same comment to people that, gee, you know, from the Republican stand side, if we could get rid of all of the Democrats, life would just be a dream. And if the Democrats could get rid of all of the Republicans, oh my God, this would be a utopia. Well, I respond to that with this. There are 8 billion, probably by the time this conversation is heard by others, we may have 8 billion people on the planet. And I say, I am pretty certain, based upon my conversations with a good friend of mine, Dr. Sky Steve Cates, who says that there are more cells in the human body than there are planets in the universe, which I find very interesting. But nonetheless, I'm sure that there are enough Class M planets, Star Trek reference, Google it, folks, that each one of us could occupy a single planet. And we could rule, and we could be king or queen of that planet. But what's the reality? The reality is that we are all here now. And what that says to my logical brain, and is reinforced by my intuition, is that we're here together because we're here together to learn to work and play and love and live together, not apart. And it's hard for me to listen to people talking about conspiracies of this group, this country, that country. Oh my God, this country is doing this particular group of people is doing that, wanting to undermine this and that and the other thing. And it's like, you know, I don't want to use some euphemisms of physical destruction necessarily, like, oh my God, it wants to make my head explode. No, I don't want to make my head explode. It defies rationale. And I like the biblical passage. I believe actually it's in the Old Testament where it says, let us sit and reason together. Well, how do you reason? What do you use to reason together? My God, I think it's the brain. Really? The brain. All right, then let's use our brains and reason together how we can stop this foolishness. Do you find yourself, in spite of the fact that I'm pretty sure that you're obviously helping people, you've been doing the work you've been doing, what, for almost 20 years or 20 plus years?
Yes.
And you've seen successes within your practice, that people are leaving your practice to go on and live productive lives and do the things that they've always wanted to do. And yet you walk outside the door, whether it be physically or through radio or television, and you hear the stupidity of mankind marching on.
Yeah. Wow. Yes, absolutely. It touches me deeply. It's let's sit together and reason together. That would be a great starting point. But also, sadly, the problem is so much deeper than rationality. I mean, John Adams had a dream that he wrote down and reported once, that he was, you know, one of the founders of our country. And, you know, our country is founded on those kinds of principles that came from the Enlightenment. We don't want to just do what the king says. We don't want to just do what the Pope says. We want to think for ourselves. Kant said in his essay, What is Enlightenment?, talking about the 18th century movement, he said it's defined by a Latin term, sapere aude, dare to know, or dare to think for yourself, dare to have your own voice. And Kant said the reason why most people don't do that isn't intelligence, it's lack of courage, because it's very difficult. Because you take criticism, then you're a heretic, then you're a criminal, then you're not in the in-group, then you're not on the right team, then no one likes you, then you're all alone. You know, to think for yourself, Kant said, takes a lot of courage. So John Adams had this dream that he was giving a speech to a whole menagerie of animals. He said, I was on the lectern, I prepared my oration with regard to the most proper skills of rhetorical, you know, structure. And I began my speech. Why can't we all reason together, animals, and come together and be one people? And then he said, then the elephants got edgy and the tigers started to growl and the birds started to flap up. And before I knew it, they had all attacked me and I was shredded to pieces and my lectern was exploded. And that's when he realized this naive idea that through intellect or theory or rationality that we can solve these problems of power and aggression is totally naive. And he believed in all that stuff. Yeah. But we're dealing with powerful energies in the unconscious. That's one of the things, if you work with people deeply, you see these dimensions of themselves. They don't tell their spouses, they don't tell their best friends that, and you see the resistance we all have towards even taking back a little bit of shadow. It's so powerful. It's not rational only. There's a lot deeper and more emotional currents we're dealing with, than just preaching or reasoning.
Yeah. You know, I don't know when it was the last time you read the preamble to the Constitution as well as the actual document, and just reading it to see what's in it. You know, you're not looking at it for legal advice or anything or political advice. You're just saying, hey, I'm curious as to what the founding fathers were trying to say here. I think this is interesting. And, you know, I love the preamble. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect government, ensure domestic tranquility, establish justice, promote the general welfare, and preserve the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, we ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. Now, that's I probably missed a little bit there, but that's the gist of it. Beautiful words, great idea. I interviewed a gentleman who wrote a book about how we talked about how we needed to go back to a rational form of government. And right out of the gate, my very first question to the man was, so when was the last time we, the Americans, the United States of America, when was the last time we had a rational government? And I wasn't that surprised at his answer. And he said, about 3 minutes after the ink dried on the Constitution signatures.
Mm-hmm.
Because the moment the ink dried and it was set in stone, so to speak, or parchment in this case, everybody now was out to make sure their ox didn't get gored. And it's like the unification was great in forming the creation thereof. But for whatever reason, they just couldn't hold it together. And this is kind of a subject I'd like to touch on here as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. And that is, when you look at someone who shares with you their story of their life and their upbringing, you're getting down to the nitty-gritty of where they come from and who they really are, both the dark and the light side.
Yeah.
And you then are able to evaluate, if that's the right word, that makes a lot of sense why they are where they are today. Perfect sense.
Yeah.
This country, whether people wish to acknowledge it or not, this country was birthed through violence. Now, some would say, well, but birth is sort of violent. I mean, you've got a woman screaming, you know, get it out, get it out. You did this to me. That kind of stuff, right? But after the birth, it's quiet and, oh, he's beautiful. He's perfect. She's perfect. She's got your eyes and da-da-da-da-da. But the reality is that I don't know of any country that, and there may be a few who were established. I want to say that there was one country that actually had not a GP, not a gross national product, but a gross happiness product, if you will, or index, you know, and I think it was Burma. And they wanted to see how happy their people were. And I wonder how we would do in America in particular, because this is where we live, how we would do on that scale of, say, 1 to 10, 1 being not happy, period, and 10 being ecstatic, just over the moon. But we don't want to acknowledge. I mean, there's a dark and a light side of us as individuals, as we've talked about, but there's also a dark and a light side to us as a society, as each civilization, not just humanity, America, Mexico, China, India, England, Ireland, and so forth. Each country has its light and dark sides. And it seems as though if you were to psychoanalyze America, it seems as though there are some segments of America that don't want to even look at the dark side, but it's the dark side mixed with the light that has put us where we are today.
I would just say, that who does want to look at the dark side? Some segments of the population. I mean, it's who does that? Who does that? For real. For real. It's often what I tell my clients, like, analysis is like, if you take the metaphor of the Last Supper and Christ was the first to eat his own flesh and drink his own blood, it's a metaphor that comes up sometimes in dreams, and celebrating a Last Supper with ourselves and eating down to the dregs, the totality of our psychosomatic reality. Who does that? I mean, I promise you, no one wants to. No one wants to, you know, and it's really, it's really tough. So it's something, if you think of politically, the psychological response to politics is deeper than the political response to me, because more universal and more fundamental, because everyone has a psychology. Doesn't matter your political party. Everyone has a shadow. Everyone has a brain and a body and and life experiences. I've worked with people on the far right in my practice, the far left on my practice. And I can say that for sure, when you look at people that have extreme political views, there's trauma behind that. there's trauma both ways. I mean, right and left, that is not susceptible to rational analysis or discussion. It's not on that level.
Is religion or philosophy, as I like to use that word instead of religion, is the same thing true in that particular realm, where they have adopted a particular philosophy because, I mean, I was born Roman Catholic. I'm no longer practicing because I got it right, but I consider myself a metaphysician because I like what Baha'u'llah said about how if you accept one of the messengers of God, you accept them all. If you reject one of them, you reject them all. Whereas my eldest sister, she went off to a very rigid form of what we'll call Christianity. That was, if it's not in the book, then we don't talk about it kind of thing. Although we have a very good relationship, don't get me wrong. But I'm just wondering if the political realm, is it more severe in the political realm than in others?
Well, there's two subjects we don't talk about at polite dinner conversations: religion and politics. You know, guess why? Well, two reasons why. That's where our highest values lie. If you touch someone's highest value, it's not open to interpretation.
Right.
And that's where our most defenses lie too, is to protect ourselves, to keep those values true. We need them to be true. So yeah, religion and politics, they are filled with what Jung would say, I would say too, archetypal imagination. Political fantasies are full of fairy tale devils and angels and new worlds and recreations and heavens on earth and apocalypses. That's all fairy tale stuff. And religion also is filled with archetypal symbols and imagination. Those can be beautiful, life-enhancing, productive dynamisms to contact. And without them, life would be meaningless. And they can also be used as defenses as well, to protect ourselves from other points of view or other people that don't share our values, which can be threatening to us. That's called fundamentalism. So, you know, is religion good or bad? Is politics good or bad? I mean, it's both. And it depends on how open or closed or defended or fundamentalist we are or not, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and of course, you just opened the door. I'm not going to go into it, but you know the story, the Chinese proverb about the farmer and his neighbor. And the neighbor comes over every day to ask how things are going, and the farmer tells him, and the neighbor says, "Oh, that's good. Oh, that's bad." And the farmer responds, "Well, who's to say whether that's good or bad?" Because each day, something else happens, and it flips to the other direction for the neighbor. "Oh, that's good. Who's to say? Oh, that's bad. Who's to say?" And so I think that's one of the things that we have in common. By the way, I want to dovetail back onto the father issue for just a moment, and then we're going to wrap things up here, because I was able to work myself through a process where I could accept and finally release myself from the grip of my mind giving free rental space, okay, as the phrase goes, you know, to a particular individual. Now, in June of 2020, under the old administration, the then president was having a rally in Phoenix, Arizona, my hometown. And I had just happened to be watching the TV. I wasn't actually listening, I was just watching. And I had reached a place where I was actually able to say, from a very humble and heartfelt position, "I love you. Okay, you're a human being. You deserve to be here just like everybody else. I don't know what your issues are, and you know what? It doesn't matter what they are. You're a human being." Okay. So I'm watching this, and I'm looking at, who I'm looking at now is the President of the United States, the leader of the free world. You know, and when I think about that position, I think about a father figure, a mentor, a comforter. And it was at the height of the pandemic. And what really hurt me more than anything was that I couldn't turn to him and say, "Hey, could you give me some words of comfort and solace? Because I'm feeling a little vulnerable. I'm a little scared about what's going to happen." And I'm usually a very optimistic person. I don't get sucked into that. But I'm seeing what's happening and how many people are getting sick and dying. And I don't want to have that happen to me, my family, my friends here in Santa Barbara. Could I talk to you for a little while? And what came back to me was, No, you can't.
Yeah.
Because you're not part of the in crowd. You don't believe the way that you have to believe in order to even get into the crowd, let alone get near to the President of the United States.
Mm.
And I have to tell you, for that moment, it was heartbreaking, because I love my father, who is 90 this year, 90 August of 2021. He's 90 years old.
Mm.
We have the greatest of relationships over the phone. And I can't even imagine what it would be like to be disowned by him now.
Mm.
Everything we've experienced together, the growing up and all of that stuff. And there I was, wanting to get solace from this man in this position, and knowing that I couldn't. Because again, my perception is he doesn't care. Because you don't toe the party line. Well, I didn't toe the party line when I was working for the Christian station either. I was referred to when I left as a casualty of Christian radio. But
yeah, wow.
I find that we tap into these archetypes as you talked about, and then what is the phrase? Oh, they say you don't ever want to meet your heroes, kind of thing, right? You know. And so there we are. And so now we have this wound, okay, that wasn't inflicted by that person, but it's all my perception. It's all my observation and so forth. And so there's a certain element there of non-reality. It's an illusion, or as Lewis Black would say, it's an illusion. But you know what I'm talking about, right? Because you kind of alluded to it earlier.
Well, I definitely know what you're talking about. And Richard, I so appreciate, I mean, look how transparent you are to your own mind as you're able to feel into, not just intellectually, but the need for a father, what it would be like to be rejected, feeling rejected. These are all this is the imagination going on in the background politically all the time. I mean, there's Trump there, but there's a father or a hero or a devil or a tyrant or something big. And you're aware of what that is in you, that process of imagination, I would say, that's present along with the reality of this person. And I would say the projection. You're aware of the projection for you, different for different people.
I don't put anybody else. None of what we talk about or what I talk about,
right,
observations, do I put on anybody else.
But how beautiful that is. I mean, you can say, oh, I'm projecting a father onto this person, or the need or the lack of a father that hurts. That's what's going on in the background. I remember to take it back in time, maybe a little politically less heated, the Catholic charities, they have an event every year during the presidential elections. They invite the presidential candidates. I remember the one with Obama and McCain, the Catholic charities event, black tie event, and they roast each other, the candidates, right?
I remember.
So, one of the things McCain said, for instance, was, Maverick I can do, but Messiah is beyond my pay scale. And then, Obama got up, he said, contrary to popular opinion, I was not born in a manger. They joke about this stuff, but it's so there in the background all the time. Archetypal imagination projected onto political figures. So taking those things back off them, you never want to meet your heroes. That can be movie stars, political, whatever it is. It's this process of taking back, oh, that's a hero. That person carries a hero project or a savior projection for me, and I can't depend on, I can, if I'm aware of that, I have the potential to not project, or that person carries the devil for me. If that's the devil, there's no discussion anymore. Where is that in me? And for you, I would just say, well, now you have a sense of your own authority, and you're closer to your own sense of comfort, being able to be the father for yourself, so to speak, not needing a political figure to carry that image for you once you're aware.
Dr. Thomas Elsner is my guest, and we are on Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. And I have to say, having an incredible conversation here, and I am so grateful for his being here on the program, and I hope that you will stay with us. As we continue here on Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, you know, folks, we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. Whether it's Jungian, and it's not Jungian, it's Jungian psychology. I'm one of those very precise individuals. I want to pronounce people's names correctly. I want to make sure I get pronunciations correctly. However, there are times when, for example, whenever I pronounce certain words, such as coincidence, I don't believe in them, but I do believe in coincidences. And I would say that, and my deepest thanks and appreciation to Emily Yurchison for referring you to me here on this program to talk about these subjects. And it's been great to converse about all of what we've talked about, and there's so much more to talk about that I'm going to ask you to come back on the program again to basically continue our conversation, because I know there are other areas that we can talk about. I know that we are facing another pandemic, and I'm not talking a virus, at least not in the conventional sense. I'm talking about depression and anxiety, and we are going to have a mental health pandemic if we're not careful, if we don't start dealing with what's real and what's really going on. And this is going to require us to look at the dark side, isn't it? Yeah.
Sadly, I mean, yeah, I think so. So thank you, Richard. I just want to say it was a great pleasure to me, and I love your transparency. Like I said earlier, eloquence and openness. And so it's great talking with you. Love to come back.
Thank you very much. I do have 3 final questions that I want to ask you, that I ask all of my guests. You may have addressed them during the program, but I like to ask them directly. Before I do that, I want to thank you for listening and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, as we give you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., 9 a.m. on Wednesdays for a special edition of Tell Me Your Story. We are podcasting at SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify. We are also on iHeartRadio, as well as Amazon Music and many other locations, too numerous to mention. We're on YouTube at Tell Me Your Story. That's the name of the channel. We hope that you'll go there. You'll watch the videos. You'll subscribe every time I post a new one. I think we're up to about 140 videos up there since last July or August. So I hope that you will take a look and listen. And also, if what we're doing, what we're talking about, what we're sharing is helpful to you, it resonates with you, and you'd like to support the work we're doing, you know, we'd greatly appreciate that. We really would. Every dollar that we are given, and we've been doing this for now 3 or 4 years asking, has gone to support this program, to take care of whatever little financial issues we have. We have a PayPal account. That is for your security as well as ours. And one area we really didn't get into, which also I want to talk about, we want you to participate in the Decade of Perfect Vision, the 2020s. We want you to spend time going within to that calm, quiet, peaceful place, listening to that still small voice, giving you guidance and inspiration, encouragement, information that is only for you. And it will help you to move from day to day, to week, month to month, year to year. I use it all the time. It took me a long time to trust it implicitly. And I still have my moments, but I usually acquiesce, and it usually helps me get through things a whole lot better than they would have if I hadn't listened. So please take the time to do that. So now back to our guest and the 3 questions that I put to the guest right at the end of the program, and that is, first of all, who is Thomas Elsner?
Well, you want a short answer to that? I mean, I would say the question should be what is as well as who is, because the who for me is, I could tell you I was born in Los Angeles. You know, I grew up, went to private school in Sherman Oaks. I was adopted. I went to law school. I became a Jungian analyst. I have 2 children, you know, the things you can know. Who is Tom Elsner? Then there's the question of what is Tom Elsner? And that's the question that opens up the unconscious and the unknown and the transpersonal or archetypal makeup of of what we call destiny or fate. That's the question of self-knowledge. That's the big question.
What is it that you hope to or want to achieve through the work that you're doing now?
I do, like you, want to be of service to people, to individuals, and also to a process that I see happening in individual lives and in the culture of death and rebirth and renewal. And when I touch that process with the people I work with, that's the moments that are my best times, my best days, you could say. Very meaningful.
And finally, what is your life's purpose?
Unknown. I mean, really unknown. That's a big question mark for me, and I'm open to the mystery, whatever that is. For me to give an answer to that would be assume that I know the answer. I don't know the answer. I go step by step in an unfolding way with the help of my dreams and life, and things continuously change and transform. If you would have said, "Hey, Tom, when you're 20 years old," if you would have said, "Tom, you're going to be a Jungian analyst," I wouldn't even know what you were talking about. I would have never thought I would go see a psychotherapist, let alone become one of them. So that's a big, wide open sea, a vast sea of expanse comes to my mind with that question.
Well, Dr. Thomas Elsner, again, I thank you so much for joining us on the program. Before we go, is there a website that you would want to send people to find out more about, if it's you, great, or about Jungian psychology? We will be linked to that website so people can continue their evolutionary and transformational process.
Sure. I have a website. It's thomaselsner.org. So ThomasElSner.org. And you can find out more about me there. I have some articles posted there and other podcasts. And sometimes I also teach seminars and classes that I can post there as well.
Fantastic. Again, I thank you so much for giving us so much time. This has been great. And we will have you back to talk about those other areas and many more here on the program.
Really look forward to it. Thank you. Thank you, Richard.
And I thank you for listening and watching. Tell me your story, New Paradigms for a New World, giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to lull.